All right. Hello, everyone. Thank you for being here today. Thank you for wanting to learn something new. And I'm excited to have this conversation because it's not just a conversation that should happen this month, but every month because of the accessibility of the topic. Today, we're going to be talking about what are LGBTQIA youth facing today. And I'm here with Carol Watchler from the Bayard Rustin Center. Carol, do you want to talk about yourself a little bit?
Sure. I'm a retired high school educator and have worked with the organization GLSEN for a good number of years, and now am involved with the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice as a community outreach coordinator. We are a safe space. We're a community resource and educational enclave located in Princeton, but a lot of our things are also virtual. So we're certainly a place that anybody can reach out to if it's staff members who want to get a deeper understanding of sexual orientation and gender identity. We can provide that. If it's young people that need some advocacy, we have done that, gone to their schools, really worked with them in their schools, and so there's a lot of ways that we can assist people. And so I am happy to be here because I know you folks are all about really helping people to be their best selves, and we want to do the same.
Yeah, so I'm just going to share real quick just the your website, just so people can look at it, just to make sure that they sort of know what they're looking at, but also that it's a really important part for us to understand, like this is more than just, oh, excuse me, looking at my emails. Don't look at the number. It's a little stressful for people when they look at the but yeah, so here is the Bayard Rustin Center page. And obviously, you can go through, let us help you. You can go through the website there. There are many different ways you can get involved. They've done a lot of presentations, obviously. So I think it's a great space to sort of, start and see where you want to go from there. Oh, I just saw you, Carol. You were there before too. But yeah, Robert have obviously been an integral part to this. He's a very passionate person, and he is a good person to have on your side, especially when you want advocacy work.
Yeah.
So did you want to, so because the Bayard Rustin Center is sort of named after Bayard Rustin, I know that there's a lot that we sort of need to cover just for the basics of an understanding for this conversation. So would you want to talk about Bayard Rustin real quick and sort of the history of that?
Sure. I certainly want to bring up Bayard Rustin. Bayard Rustin is an important advocate, activist in the 20th century, born, I believe, in 1912 and passed away in 1987. But his primary place where he made such a difference is in the civil rights movement. We are familiar with the Freedom Riders. He organized a freedom ride way back in the 40s before they did the one in the 60s. He was so involved with and a mentor to Martin Luther King on the whole question of nonviolence. That was his, from his Quaker background, nonviolence was so important to him. And he really believed that the March on Washington 1963, which he was critical organizer for, be a nonviolent event, and how amazing to bring those 200,000 people together, primarily African American, in a city that really didn't welcome African Americans, and bring them there, have a peaceful demonstration, and enable everybody to get home safely. So that was a tremendous action that he was known for his organizing ability. He was even involved in African anti-colonial movements and helping teach nonviolence there. And the interesting thing is, though, he was a gay man, and he wasn't going to hide that. And so in 1950s and 60s, even the leaders of those wonderful civil rights organizations were not quite ready to accept a gay man to be kind of out in front, and the picture of the movement for him. So, there he was with his African American identity and his LGBTQ identity, and just letting people know that with those he could be the good leader that he was, the good organizer. And So we say at Bayard Rustin Center that we do not want to see anyone have to hide or put out of a movement because they have an identity that they claim and own, and so that's something that we oftentimes still want to help young people know, is that they can claim their identity and can be proud of it. So that's the gift of Bayard Rustin.
That's awesome. And I think that especially we have that, right? But what also is an interesting part of it and to understand is that there's not just one identity when it comes to people who have multifaceted, anything, because as humans, we're complicated, we're complex, we have a lot going on. And so when we're looking at this, I think what's important is understanding the sort of versions of intersectionality that exist, right? And especially because the civil rights movement sort of came with a lot of different movements after. There were ramifications of those movements, right? So when we talk about understanding racism in the United States, it's more about also understanding that when people were getting past the skin color, they were looking inward and what that inwardness looks like for them. And LGBTQIA issues and civil rights were obviously part of that. So when we talk about intersectionality, it sort of implies that nothing exists in a silo, nothing exists on its own. And if we address both parts or all parts, then we're able to come to a better understanding as a person as a whole, but also how we can treat them with whether or not they have addiction or any sort of mental health disorder or anything like that, because understanding the whole person is what's important, right? So, Carol, in your work, Carol Watchler, in your work, what have you sort of seen when it comes to intersectionality?
Okay, so can you hear me? I think I'm frozen.
Uh, yes. You look a
I don't
little
know.
frozen. You haven't blinked in a while, so maybe.
I've tried, I've tried to a couple of different things, and I don't know whether I need to go out and come back in.
Would you like to?
It seems like it would make sense.
Yeah. So I'll take this road and then you can take the rodeo back after. So I'll see you soon.
Yeah, and nothing's clicking off for me, unfortunately.
Okay. So
So
we'll just
I don't know whether you can
technicalities.
kick me out.
Oh, do you want me to? I would never want to do that.
Let me.
Would you want
No,
to try now?
I can't quit Zoom. Doesn't go. I'm really sorry.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I mean, we're here. So if you want to keep
Okay,
going.
if I can keep talking, I don't know whether I can bring anything
Yeah.
else
Yeah,
up,
you're
but
good.
okay. So you asked me about intersectionality and how that's affecting young people, and yes, I mentioned, for example, to Ruth that I just was in touch with a family where with that a young person who was really working to overcome addiction, and the adults in the family really wanted to help them get into AA, and there was no comfort there because young African American did not see many other Black people in this setting, and so what I think about with that is this was a person who was not LGBTQ, but if that was an additional burden, how difficult to find a space that would understand you both in your struggles as an African American or a person of color, as well as being a gay person or a transgender person. So right now, for many young people, I think there's not just that feeling of being invisible and not necessarily knowing how to access the resources that you really need. Um, there's also some tremendous anxiety among young people and among, I guess, maybe among all of us, even older LGBT people and our allies, because of the pretty horrific things that are going on around the country in terms of restricting, legally restricting people from claiming their identity. The whole thing in Florida of "Don't Say Gay," when young people it's almost like it's the opposite of New Jersey, because in New Jersey, we are developing and working so hard to manifest inclusive curriculum that's now been required for a year, but I know that educators are still working really hard to get the ways to be inclusive and to make it be just a part of the history, a part of the arts and literature, a part of.
Oh, Carol just got kicked out. So dang it. And Carol brought up a good point. And once she pops back in, then we'll sort of round that point out. But I do have a couple of things I would like to show is that, yes, Carol was talking about and sort of extrapolating on the idea that when we are LGBTQIA, we have that, right? That's the identity we have. If you have that identity, if that's something you hold dear, if that's an identity that you have and it informs a lot of who you are, when there are other places that say that what that is not right in any setting or it's not right in certain settings, it makes you feel disenfranchised. And I wanted to show that also, just because New Jersey's not doing it doesn't mean that it doesn't affect New Jersey youth. And what I mean by that is, especially in our curriculums that we have, especially with our Too Good for Drugs and Violence curriculum, we essentially say that conflict is conflict, regardless of who it happens to. If you are surrounded by it, if you are in front of it, if there's an implied violence there, violence and implied violence still hurts you. And even though it's not happening to you, being surrounded by it still has a psychological effect. So even if you're not being hurt, if someone's not physically abusing you, but they're physically abusing someone in front of you, that still hurts you. And I think that we can sort of extend that to the youth that are in our environment today that are facing this today. And I have here a legislative tracker that tracks all anti-LGBTQIA bills. And these are just some of the ones that were being introduced in the past, I believe this is just the past month. So these are quite a few. As you can see, it's May 23rd, 2022. All this is in May. So obviously there are a lot of different things. These are the states that have introduced anti-LGBTQIA legislation. Tennessee has 31. New Jersey has 4. Pennsylvania has 2. So you can sort of look through this and see Florida had 13. So these are the things that I think are so important. And these are just anti-LGBTQIA bills. If we talk about anti-transgender bills, you can sort of get a different look on that. And that is actually much more. Here in New Jersey, it's been 0, but Florida has been 1, Tennessee has been 14, Arizona 12, Iowa 14. So while we're looking through this, I think what's so important for us to understand is that it's not just that it is, it is just, for example, adults wanting to have these rights. It's literally talking about how children are regulated in these spaces. So as you can see here, one of them is designated sex for school-sponsored sports, prohibits changing sex on birth certificates, establishes guidelines for public school student participation in athletics, Save Women's Sports Act. Like, all of these things are very much a part of the identity of being a student, of being a person that is in society, that wants things, modifies provisions relating to gender reassignment treatment for children. So these are the things that are sort of going through. And we can talk about school policy bills, youth healthcare bans. There's so much, and it's so extensive. And I think this is the part that is the violence. This is the part that is the much of it, right? It's the teeth that sort of bears into the psyche of these children that are looking to see where they can be accepted in these spaces. If you're looking for this resource, I will share it in the chat, but we will come back to this later if you would like to look more at this. Carol, anything you would like to add? Or Watchler?
Okay, what is the,
So
I don't
I was
get
talking
it.
about the presence of violence. being violent.
I get it. And we talked about that a little bit before, and I'm not quite sure. I still am in a weird space, but I may be able to share my screen. And would you like to see that short video that introduces you to
Yeah,
some
if you would like to, if you can.
Let me see whether that works. Host disabled participant from sharing.
I just made you a co-host.
Oh, all righty. So let's see what happens now. I think this is going to be it. Okay, share. Yes. All right. We go one more step. And I'm going to work on moving this back to the beginning.
My name is Rose.
Yeah, there we go.
I'm a transgender girl. I was born a boy, but I always knew that I was a girl.
My name is Devon. I'm a trans male. That means I was born female, and I live now as a male. When I was 3, I decided that I was going to grow up and be a father and marry Janet Jackson.
She would write letters to Santa Claus, to the Tooth Fairy. When would I be turned into a girl? Could you turn me into a girl?
I'm Jay. I'm a non-binary trans person. That means that I'm not a man, nor am I a woman. I was raised as a girl, but when I learned about non-binary gender identities, it was like a whole new world had opened up for me.
My name is Ronnie, and my sister Ellie is transgender.
Ellie told us on her 4th birthday that she was a girl in her heart and her brain. And I said, "You're my favorite princess boy." And what did you say, Ellie?
No, I'm a princess girl.
My struggling point was this had to be a phase.
The reality is acceptance takes a while.
I was terrified of coming out. I was afraid of losing friends, family, loved ones. I was afraid of this discrimination and potential violence I could face.
I was so terrified that I wanted to die. Got threatening letters. One of the quotes said, do us a favor, Paula, and put that gun back up to your head and finish the job.
I'm scared as a dad for her safety, whether society will be as accepting as her family and her friends are.
I feel embarrassed and unsafe when people out me to other people.
If there isn't a gender-neutral bathroom available, when there are only men's and women's bathrooms, I have to make a decision about how I look that day and whether there's more risk for me going into the men's room or the women's room.
I was chased by 4 people in the metro for being transgender.
I have been denied health care. I have been gawked at. I've been humiliated. I have been physically assaulted several times when using a bathroom.
Seeing her face the first time we let her wear a dress outside of the house. Pretty special.
You're different, that's okay. Just keep on being yourself.
Support means listening, maybe not understanding, but just listening and being there for me. Pushing.
All right, Carol? Carol? Watchler? Yes. The video froze. But Carol, are you able to speak? Oh no, what happened? Is everyone here? Can everyone hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. I don't hear anyone else.
Okay, interesting. So I'm going to, okay, all right, Carol, I don't know exactly what happened, but I hope you're still there. Oh, she got kicked out again. Man, her Wi-Fi, maybe it senses her fear. But when we're sort of talking about this, and I think what's really important here, especially, is that we yeah, we're going to share the video because a lot of people weren't able to view the full thing. But I think what's really important is that there are so many points that were made in that video, especially with acceptance, violence against these people, especially people who have chosen to live their authentic selves, you know, things like that, that it's so important for us to understand that it is so much facing these people, that it's not just an inward expression, it's an outward expression of that acceptance as well. And I do want to share a couple of things here, especially that, yes, I have the legislative anti-tracker up here, of course, but I also have pronoun usage. And what I want people to realize is this is youth, right? And LGBTQIA youth experience higher rates of mental health challenges compared to their cisgender parts. And I'm going to be sharing that right now. Carol texted me and she said, yeah, she will be back in a minute. So that is not what I want. Share. There we go. Okay, so LGBTQIA youth experience higher rates of mental health challenges compared to their cisgender counterparts. Pronouns are a way to streamline language and have historically emphasized a binary construct of gender in many languages. So it says here, 1 in 4 LGBTQ youth use pronouns or pronoun combinations that fall outside their binary. So this may include he, him, or he, him, they, she, they, those sorts of things. So a lot of people may sort of dance between the binary. And nearly 2/3 of LGBTQ youth who use pronouns outside of their binary opt to use combinations of he, him, she, her, and they, them. So there are some people that identify with all the pronouns. There are some people that only identify with a few. Some LGBTQ youth use pronouns beyond those already familiar to most of them. So z, zer, za, zim, those sorts of things. That doesn't usually happen. But as we're looking at this, especially when we're looking at this, I think what's so important is to understand that there are several studies done through the Trevor Project and GLAAD that say using a person's pronouns lowers their suicide ideation by over 40%. And I have a couple of studies on that that I will reference later. But I think more than anything is that when you use their pronouns, when you use their right name, if nothing else is right in their lives, if they are affirmed in their gender identity, if they are affirmed in their identities in general, they are then able to have space where they can feel like they can be themselves, right? And I think that's so important. And also, this is a great resource for a lot of different reasons, but I really think that, you know, the visuals here are really great. You can obviously reach them about us. If you want to learn how to be an ally to transgender and non-binary youth, it's right here. They have actually quite a lot of good books that they recommend for that as well. And that's something that I would, you know, sort of round out. I also say that a lot of people may want to know what the difference is between sex and gender. And we're not necessarily getting a whole lot into that because I do have another presentation from my Empowering Youth series, if anyone would like to go on that to look at any of the definitions. But it's right here in case you want to give it a refresher or to sort of understand more about what that looks like. Carol, it's nice to have you again. How are you?
Oh, goodness. Are we talking frustrating or what?
It's the Wi-Fi. It always is.
Okay, so now I have to.
So I was talking about transgender youth especially. Yeah. And I think that is when we use their pronouns, it's a really important part of the conversation, right? And we know that using pronouns is important. And when the LGBTQIA youth are facing this sort of thing, what are the things that we can do to help them, maybe in schools, being around them? What are the spaces that we can help, or how can we help? As an educator yourself, what do you see as that? Or like, what does that look like?
Well, one of the things that's really great is that the New Jersey legislature actually passed a piece of legislation that directed the Commissioner of Education to put out something guidance for school districts to use. And some school districts had already kind of moved into the space of having determined some good policy that would support LGBT, but particularly, well, this is specifically for transgender youth. To send Ruth, and if you know, and Ruth, if I can ask you to just pass it on to the group here, the guidance that actually was published by the Department of Education, and it kind of first and foremost says that any young person should be able to use the bathrooms or other gender segregated facilities that conform with their gender identity. Now, it doesn't say that that person must, because let's imagine a young person, maybe third grade, who's transitioning. So moving from the presentation of supposing they were male to they're going to present their true gender identity of female, what they know themselves to be. So now they're coming to school and presenting as female, and maybe they're not quite ready to go into the girls' bathroom. So there's nothing that says they have to. If there is an alternative, hopefully that either in some office that there's a bathroom that they can use, or more and more schools are designating gender neutral bathrooms. Great, not only for youngsters who are transitioning or non-binary youngsters to be able to use, but I think there are times when any one of us would have been so glad to have a single stall bathroom that we could have used. Maybe we had a health situation that it would just have been more relieved not to have gone into a multi-stall bathroom and be there. So that's one thing. It is so clear in that guidance. Also related to sports, that that the young person is able to participate in the sport that belongs to their gender identity. Now, I know the New Jersey SIAA, Athletic Association. Do I know all those letters? No, but they are the folks that really govern the athletic leagues in the schools in the state of New Jersey, and they have thought this through really carefully. Their things are in conformity with the with what the guidance that came out from the Department of Education. And in many cases, they were there first, talking about how that would be. And the rules may be different for youngsters in high school or middle school or grade school from what you're going to find with people at the college level. So, so some of the, bad talk that's going around about girls, transgender girls in athletics, and being legislated in other parts of the country is nonsense. People need to look at folks who know the possibilities of these young people and be able to adjust their policies accordingly. Policy says that that particularly counselors should be very familiar with the whole process that a young person goes through in terms of transition. For the most part, in elementary school, middle school, even, this is going to be social transition, which, as Ruth was talking about, the name might be changed, and the pronouns be the ones that go with the gender that the person knows themselves to be. As a person moves on into older high school years and beyond high school, someone probably, and even throughout, schools need to have good lists of recommendations for healthcare personnel that the family can go to, that the child can go to, and one that is very comprehensive and just has really good people working with it is the Proud Gender Center in New Brunswick. Are people familiar with that at all?
Yeah, well, I worked with them for one of my empowering youth programs, but they are wonderful, and I will share the resource as well. But Carol, if you want to talk about them, go ahead.
Well, right, just to know that they not only have the medical specialists who can assist, but also have support groups and other support groups that are available. And I'm going to think for a second about families, a PFLAG, Parents, Friends of Lesbians and Gays. Now, most of those PFLAG chapters have a particularly transgender group of parents and other folks who are being supportive of the youngster. And I would say Princeton PFLAG is the one that serves the Mercer County area, and good people, very valuable people in terms of making recommendations and referrals to healthcare and to other needs that a person might have. So the other thing that is back into that guidance that went out to schools is that there should be, and there's nothing that should prevent there being an organization in the school, and this is very much in high schools throughout the state and more in middle schools throughout the state. People are thinking about how to make that available for younger children. And I know one school where the okay, so they've been called gay straight alliances. Now they're often called gender sexuality alliances, but there was a school district that had one in an elementary schools. It was for the parents and the educators to come together and really talk about the concerns that were that surrounded the children who had identity of LGBT. So yes, it's so important for anyone who is identifying to find the group of support. And as I say, in most schools, gay straight alliances or gender sexuality alliances, or sometimes they're called PRISM or Kaleidoscope or other names, because
Spectrum I've heard as well.
Spectrum, right? Yeah, just and sometimes other organizations really pick up the advocacy. For example, I know in one school, the Amnesty International group in chapter in their school was addressing LGBT issues on an international level, and they said, well, we can advocate for our own peers right here at home too. And so they became a group that was really helpful for youngsters to drift towards and gravitate towards. Yeah, those are some of the primary things that are in that guidance. And maybe even the most primary is that no discrimination will be tolerated on the basis of gender identity. And of course, our law against discrimination in the state of New Jersey, which is one of the earliest and the strongest laws against discrimination, did add on sexual orientation back in 1992. Oh my goodness, what a day that was, because that meant that no discrimination on the basis of housing, employment. Some teachers were just so relieved about that. Many financial things, and public accommodation, which schools are considered a place of public accommodation. So that's been tested back in the 2000s when a case went through the courts dealing with LW, and Toms River School District knows that that law against discrimination protects people on the basis of sexual orientation, and then gender identity got added pretty quickly after that. So the law is there, really strong for people, and the other law that's valuable is the anti-bullying law that applies to schools. But I think many youth-serving organizations kind of look at that and say, well, we're not going to let anything like that happen to any youngster who's involved in any of our programs. So it does provide for people to be advocates for anyone who's experiencing harassment, intimidation, and bullying. And there's one little kind of hitch to that, which could bring any of you who are taking counselor roles outside of school into. That law says that any adult in the setting who knows of harassment, intimidation, and bullying is bound in duty to get that to the principal or to their principal's designee. And then any person involved in that discrimination or bullying action, their parents, guardians, or parents are notified. The difficulty with that is that sometimes a youngster who is LGBT is not ready to have that conversation with their parents. So here's the school trying to help them and kind of puts them in an awkward situation. And if you're a counselor in another setting, might be a really important person for the youngster to be assisted in. Okay, so now parents are going to become aware, and sometimes other people who are investigated in the setting it forces outing of the young person. So adults to guide a youngster through the coming out process. And I would just say a little bit more about that, because the whole coming out process, which Raquel Willis, that wonderful transgender Black woman who pulled together that terrific rally at the Brooklyn Museum back in 2020 that brought thousands of people together to say, not only do Black lives matter, but Black trans lives matter, because they are a demographic that is at most risk for harassment, intimidation, bullying, and violence. And, even to the extent of more people have lost their lives from that group of people. So it's real important to be prepared to, and oftentimes I think something that kind of pushes a young person into behaviors that are such as alcoholism or drug use are the fears about how can I come out? How can I come out to my parents? So anyone who can help them say, if you'd like to have a conversation with your parents and have me be there with you, that's something that we say to counselors in school or even teachers in school who are advocates for youngsters, the GSA advisors, for example, be there with the youngster when they're doing this conversation with the parents. Sometimes it means the parents have to, well, I always tell the kids, you know what, maybe it took a while for you to come out to yourself, but your parents have to come out too, as the parent of a lesbian or the parent of a transgender person. And, that might take them a little bit. I like to tell the story of the fact that my father at my partner's and my 25th anniversary, after being a little bit not quite sure how to handle this whole thing, his daughter being a lesbian. So there we were at a little celebration, and people were doing their roasting of Anne and Carol. And so my father wanted to take his turn, and he stood up and raised his glass and said, well, I've known this person longer than any of you have, and I've come to be happy about this relationship. I'll tell you, there was not a dry eye in the place. And it's a gift that I will take with me through my entire life. So sometimes parents are in that place, and the kids need to know that it might take your parents a little while to get adjusted to that. Now, the parents can be helped to go to PFLAG, where they'll find some other parent. They think they're the only parents who have to deal with this, but no, there are others who've been down that road and can help them. And the kids, of course, think they're the only one in that place, but no, they need to get with some other folks who have stories that they can listen to too, because probably the best thing for a youngster who's coming out is to have the chance to be empathetic to another person coming out, and maybe be a half a step ahead of them, and be able to give them some courage and say, I did it, and this is a good group to be in, and stay here, stay with us, stay in school, because that's one of the toughest things that pushes kids out of classes, out of school, and really means that limits their future choices. So, anything we can do to say, just really hang in there, and we'll find the help. We'll get you the help that you need. Helping them find their GSA, helping them find their way to the Bayard Rustin Center for Social Justice, where we had some groups in the before days when we were over in 21 Wigan Street. Now we're at 12 Stockton. Things are all kind of coming out of pandemic, and we're trying to build back up. And so some youngsters from the Princeton GSA have been over to visit us, and we can, if people get a hold of us, and I'll, I was going to put my my email in the last slide that I had. Not doing that. We'll just
I'll
let.
put that in. You're good. I got your
Okay.
information. You're good.
Let me just stop and let folks say what their questions are. I'm rambling a bit.
No, Carol, that was all good information. Thank you. And it's just such a blessing to have people who share their stories, but also have self-empathy. And I think that's what a lot of people, you know, especially when they're older, are learning how to have that. And when children can sort of, instead of have rumination, have self-empathy, I think it's so important for them to have that practice, to be like, you were 8 years old and you were struggling with your gender identity. Like, it's okay, you made those choices, you know, to understand that not everyone has the same journey, but everyone knows how it feels. Even if we're not in the same boat, we're still in the same storm, you know, that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm.
So I think more than anything, what rings true to me and what you sort of kept re-emphasizing in a way is that, especially in prevention, we have a lot of protective factors and risk factors. That's sort of how we sort of look at the influences of how people will, you know, have the trajectory of their lives in some senses. Whether or not you've come across violence or you've, you know, been rejected by your family, those sorts of things. And those are risk factors. But that doesn't mean protective factors can't exist that, you know, combat those risk factors. And school and accepting adults and people who care about children, those are the protective factors. Having spaces where you can be yourself, you know, making sure people have housing, you know, LGBTQI people are very likely to be homeless. It's just, all of those things are protective. And when you have basic needs, then you are able to flourish. You're out of survival mode. And the goal is to make sure people are out of survival mode so they can learn who they are and become who they are, fully realized in a life affirming way. And I think that's so hard for some people. And it's hard even without social media and all that other stuff, all the other complicated stuff. It's hard being a human, much less being a human with the facets that people are trying to take away from you or people are trying to combat. And it's sort of being like, why are you attacking one part of my body when it's one part of my whole body? You know, I need my hand. That's my sexuality. I need this part of me. And I think that as adults, we need to recognize that in children, because without that, they can't be who they are and they can't be fully functioning people who give back to their society, who are just, I don't know, good people, who are goodness, considering, you know, the times we have ahead of us. So I think that that's a really important, you know, point to sort of piggyback off of yours as well, Carol. So thank you. Anything else anybody would like to add? I do have some other things, but I wanted to add that after. So does anybody have any remarks or anything like that?
I just want to say thank you for that point that you made, Carol, for the parents and for the children to realize that they've been going through this for a while and give their parents a chance. That was just like such a light bulb for me. And I thank you for that. That I will share that when I'm sure at some point with some families. So I'm grateful. Thank you.
Yeah. Oh, go ahead, Carol.
One other thing that comes from families, Caitlin Ryan, San Francisco State University, and I heard her speak, and it's been a number of years, but she has done lots and lots of research around, and this was on particularly sexual orientation and families of gay and lesbian and bisexual young people out there in California. So identifying risk factors and almost microaggressions, maybe the two are somewhat the same, but things that parents might say to a young person, all the way from I can't get used to it, to how can I tell your grandparents, to the church is never going to let you do this, to the Bible is against this, and she had about 4 other, like, just very clear things like that. And she studied a group of people who had come through their adolescence and had suicide ideation back during adolescence, and found out that if parents or whoever was kind of the important adult in a person's life reduced that kind of microaggression by just changing one of those behaviors, the risk for suicide dropped 50%.
My goodness.
And I know she's done some additional research on transgender persons that may go kind of along the same line. I'm eager to track that down and find it, Caitlin Ryan. That was just so powerful to know that the slight changes in behavior that signal to the young person a little bit more acceptance.
Yeah.
And maybe
I'm sorry, that tracks exactly with the research in adverse childhood experiences for other issues too. And it's just having that one person in your life that can help to negate all the other, the extra hormones and things produced by the amygdala, and then the suppression of the frontal cortex development because of the cortisol and the things that are being exuded from the stress, the toxic stress. It's all probably all the same physiology going on. And it's so interesting. And I just was at the American Academy of Pediatric conference on early relational help. And essentially it's developing the personal relationship with your child by reading to the child, by face-to-face, touching, smiling, raising your eyebrows, just doing all these ordinary things are what build a relationship with the child that helps to counteract the toxic stress in their life. So that fits exactly perfectly with what you were just saying. By changing these little things, we can help the children transition. And it's really, I felt very encouraged after going to that seminar, because up until then, everything was so damaging to these babies and children's brains. And it was like, how are we going to fix this going on? Because it has long-term health effects. You see 20 years later, these people who have 8 out of 10 ACE scores live 20 years less. They have heart disease, they have cancer. You know, the stress is shortening the telomeres on their genes, so they don't have, they get more genetic mutations. So it's like, we have to fix these things in early childhood if we want to change society and change the violence and change the health and all these things that we're seeing later on. And so
thank you so much for actually also bringing in the science aspect of it. That's just kind of important for me to remind myself.
And also the feelings, like people have feelings, right? And everyone is compassionate and has those types of feelings, but you add the science to it and it's like, they're not making this up. This is not something that is outside or it's just in their head or anything like that. It's everywhere. It's scientific, it's genetic, it's passed down, it's birth, it's everything, it's formation. So when we have the science to back up that adverse childhood experience, it helps us realize that compassion and treatment of a child is so important for their development. And especially, you know, this is one aspect, LGBTQIA youth, but that doesn't mean it doesn't relate to other parts and other facets of people's youth and people's identities. So it's one part, but it's an important part. And so, you know, there are just so many things that interact and interrelate. Melissa, did you want to say something?
Just another point, not on the ACEs thing, but I was just kind of thinking, you know, obviously New Jersey isn't perfect, but I was thinking about that point made earlier on in the presentation about how in New Jersey we are a little bit more insulated from some of these, you know, especially legislation that's occurring, especially in the South. But I'm kind of thinking about the impact on youth. And I was thinking, you know, that those types of laws, as well as some others, can actually curb the choices and options for our youth as well. Because I know my daughter's willing to look worldwide for education beyond high school. But I think that she would definitely take pause going to a place that had such laws and such, you know, such attitudes from their populace. And I was just thinking that that's just another limiting factor that that is brought about by misunderstanding, bigotry, you know, religious fervor or whatever. Because I know with her, she wants the best program. She's fearless enough to say, I don't care where that is, but if a state were to have something like this, 2 states in particular, she's mentioned specifically, she was like, I won't even think about looking at programs in those areas. So I was just trying to think of, you know, yes, New Jersey, our area of New Jersey, because has a little bit more resources or a little bit more acceptability or something like that. But the areas that don't can have an impact even here. So I was just kind of thinking of that on a worldwide scale as well.
Thanks,
Thank you.
Melissa.
Yeah.
I think what you sort of pinpointed on was possibility. And that you have all these choices, and adults who are making these decisions for you have taken out of the 50 states or the 50 choices you were going to make, you're now going to narrow it down to 35. And so you have taken away their 15 other choices, and that's not fair to them. That's not inherently right for them, because they feel as if they can't exist in those spaces. You have taken away what they thought could be safe spaces or safety and insulated spaces. So I just find that interesting. Thank you, Melissa, for that. I don't think I have anything else or any other questions. This was a great conversation. And I'm so happy that we were able to sort of round this out in a way where it's saying everything is multifaceted, but I think that what's so interesting is we have Carol Watchler, who's on the advocacy side and education. And then we've got, the Mercer Council and Carol Nicholas from GMPHP, like all of this stuff. We've all sort of been here, and we're all from different areas, but we picked a lane and we ran with it. And we decided to look at how other people were affected by the things in our field. And regardless of whether it was medicine or advocacy or prevention work, all that stuff interconnects, and having partnerships in these areas only strengthens how we can tackle these adverse childhood experiences and how we can tackle these sort of risk factors that permeate through our society. So I'm just so thankful that we have so many people on our side on the good fight of making sure youth have a fulfilling and life-affirming experience as they're growing up. So thank you, Carol. I'll be giving all your information to everyone that wants it. Also, this will be a YouTube recording, so you can come back to this whenever you would like. I will give all the resources that I looked through and had questions for and everything like that. So Carol, if you would like to send me anything with the PowerPoint that you had or the video, that would be great. And I'll be sending that out to anyone who wants it. So thank you again, Carol. I appreciate it.
Well, I thank you so much for just bringing me into this circle. And I'm glad to have met Carol and Melissa. Just would also say, if there's anything further I could help you with in your settings or with young people that you are aware of, please don't hesitate. And
thank you.
Have a wonderful, wonderful rest of the day, and keep doing your good work.
Thank you, Carol. I look forward to learning more about your organization too. I'd never heard of it, so thank you.
Probably one of the, and I really should say this. Our Facebook page is probably got the most things that resources on it. And one of the things that we have done during the pandemic was to have a social justice power hour, 7 o'clock each night on our Facebook page. I think they're continuing. I think we're bringing up some old ones and showing them again, but there's so many wonderful ones. That's where I met Raquel Willis, who I am so, she had so many good things to say in her video. They're all archived, so you can go back and find them. What my job over the next however many months is to try to get a good catalog so that people know where they can find those things.
And I'll link your Facebook page to our PCMC when I put it out.
Okay.
So
good.
People have access to your stuff as well.
Right.
It's a good resource, and I'm happy to connect people. So thank you again.
And thank you, Ruth, for thinking of this and organizing it.
Thank you.